In a small Midwestern town suburb, there lived a 10-year-old girl named Claire. Claire was a joyous girl who had a love of all things bright and colorful. Like most girls her age, she liked to dream about being able to fly like a bird, or swim fast like a dolphin. Her parents, of course, thought nothing of it. "Kids these days," her mother would say. "I remember the 4th grade," her father would joke. Also, like most girls her age, Claire was scared of monsters, and all the places they could come from. Under her bed, in her closet, and even under her own bed covers. One night Claire was reading a book to herself in bed in an attempt to fall asleep quicker. Unknown to her, a shadowy figure was watching from in her backyard. The figure was wearing a dark brown burial shroud, and it had a face resembling a brownish-red skull. As soon as Claire fell asleep, it sprang into action. Running across the backyard, it leaped onto a gutter and started climbing upwards. When it was in close enough range, it leapt up onto Claire's window, and with one hard pull opened it up and slipped inside. It made its way to Claire's bed, holding a medical syringe in its hand. It quickly stuck the syringe into Claire's arm and injected its contents. It then got out of Claire's room as quickly as it came in. The next day after school, Claire had to drop off some books at the public library, so she decided to forgo taking the bus home. After Claire was finished at the library, she realized the need to hurry home fast before her parents started getting worried. As she passed a path through the woods, she realized that heading straight through would take her in the same general direction as her house. Though reluctant to enter at first, she eventually mustered the courage and dashed into the woods. Unfortunately for Claire, the woods were thick and the path split up a couple of times, and one wrong turn was all it took for her to get lost. Night fell, and Claire was still lost in the woods. In the distance she could hear owls hooting, and a light fog was rising around the base of all the tree trunks. Claire was frightened, but kept trying to convince herself that she was alone. For if she was alone, then there wouldn't be anything around to be afraid of. Suddenly she heard something off to her right. Looking through the trees, she thought she could make out the silhouette of something. Claire started to pick up the pace a little. After walking another 100 feet, she heard something behind her. Turning around, she could make out the silhouette a bit clearer, but mainly all she could see was that it was huge. Panicking, Claire started jogging, but didn't get very far before she heard a twig snap from very close behind her, and felt hot breath coming down on the back of her neck. Claire turned around, but what she stared at petrified her with fear. Staring down at her was a monster, 100 times her size, its body covered with bluish-gray hair, 2 goat-like horns protruding out of its head, and yellow eyes with blood-red pupils. For about a solid minute, the two stood still, locked onto the other's eyes. All the while Claire tried to start running, but was unable to make her legs move. All of a sudden the creature took a small step forward, at which point Claire finally started to run. The creature followed in hot pursuit, taking giant leaps with every step. Claire felt the adrenaline shoot through her body as she ran, and even thought she could hear it ringing in her ears. Suddenly Claire came to a halt in front of a steep hill. She looked down to see that the bottom of the hill was too far to safely tumble down. Then she heard a growl behind her. Before she could completely turn around, the creature lunged at her. Instinctively, Claire leapt out of the way of the monster, but ended up going right over the edge of the hill. She let out a long, shrill scream as she fell through the air towards the rocky hillside. Suddenly, Claire felt something shoot through her whole body. Whatever it was, it put a lot of pressure on her muscular system, and it forced her arms to spread out like airplane wings. She started gliding just before hitting the hillside, while her body started changing. Claire's breastbone got heavier and weighed her down, which required her to flap her arms to stay airborne. All along her arms, feathers began sprouting and folding backwards to allow air to pass over them. Claws began to grow from Claire's fingers and toes, curving around into a hook shape. Her whole body then meshed itself internally and spread out again. Claire was at a complete loss for words about what just happened to her. Before she concerned herself any further, however, she looked behind her to see the monster looking mean-eyed at her and snarling its teeth. Then it finally dawned on Claire that somehow she could fly. Without any hesitation, she lifted her wings upward and soared higher into the sky, farther out of the monster's reach. Whenever she started losing lift, Claire would give a couple strong flaps of her wings to stay airborne. After a while, Claire gave her wings a rest, while the cool night air let her glide along, gradually getting closer to the ground. Being so young, Claire was unable to fully grasp just how miraculous her new ability of flight was. While she was astonished by it, she had yet to fully develop her perception of reality. An adult in the same situation would go mad upon such a revelation, whereas a little kid like Claire would have yet to let go of their imagination, so they can accept flying without fear of going mad. Claire took a long while to enjoy her newfound ability, and all it could give to her. She especially enjoyed the bird's-eye view of the suburbs. Being able to see many square miles of land at once was awe-inspiring. As Claire made a right turn into some clouds, something in the corner of her eye caught her attention. Looking right, she thought she could see a dark figure through the clouds. Alarmed, Claire swooped down fast. As she turned back around, she immediately saw something rushing towards her. Claire reacted just in the nick of time to avoid the creature, swooping down even lower out of its way. As it passed over her, Claire got a good look at the creature. It had large griffin wings, extra long talons, silver feathers all over its body, and its eyes gleamed blue light that shone through the dark night. Claire looked down for a good place on the ground to hide. She spotted a lake some 200 meters to her front right. All of a sudden, the creature came back around for a second attack. Before Claire could look back up, the creature charged head-on at her. Thinking fast, Claire did a nosedive out of the creature's way. She did it just in time, too. The creature slammed into her right foot as it flew over her. Claire cried out in pain for a moment before continuing her descent towards the lake. If she could get under the water, the creature would be unable to reach her, assuming it couldn't dive into the water like a seagull. Claire looked behind her to see the creature making yet another charge at her. Claire looked back in front of her to see that the lake was almost right above her. She could hear the sound of the creature's wings flapping, getting closer and closer behind her. She looked back again, only to be staring directly into the creature's open mouth, which was no more than 2 feet away. Claire let out a brief but ever so spine-chilling scream as she did another nosedive as the creature passed over her again. She didn't even know if she was directly over the lake. A few seconds later, Claire did indeed fall into the lake, though the impact sent a sudden burst of pain throughout her whole body. As she started to push her way under the water, Claire felt another sensation happening in her body. She looked down to see that her hands were returning back to normal, as well as her feet. Her breastbone also returned to normal, and all the feathers along her arms started falling out. Then Claire's body started to change again. Her legs melted together and became scaly, while her cheeks sliced open in 5 perfectly even rows. Realizing she could now breathe underwater, Claire immediately began swimming frantically towards the lake bottom, as far away as possible from the creature. Safe on the lake bottom and not forced to go back to the surface for air, Claire laid back on some rocks and thought about how great both her new swimming and flying abilities were. The lake bottom was so clear, and Claire could make out the silhouettes of several fish, both big and small. She then got up off the rocks and began swimming crazily around in the water, fully embracing the freedom of movement bestowed upon her. Then she began counting how many fish she could see in the distance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Claire stopped counting. She had spotted something that looked eerily different from a regular fish. It looked to be huge, very long with gleaming yellow eyes. Claire looked away, thinking that maybe it would ignore her if she ignored it. After looking back and seeing that it was gone, she breathed a watery sigh of relief and started swimming towards the lake shore. She hadn't gone farther than a few yards when Claire saw something move out of the corner of her eye. Claire looked to see a silhouette of something very long and serpentine swimming alongside her. Claire panicked and began swimming faster. Suddenly something darted out right in front of her. It was the serpent. It had gleaming yellow eyes, a half-dozen tentacles protruding from all along its body, and had skin scalier than any fish known to mankind. Just like the previous creatures, it immediately charged for Claire. Claire quickly swam out of the way and began heading towards the lake shore. The serpent stayed right behind her the entire way, never more than a few yards behind Claire, and always with its mouth wide open, ready to eat her up. After a long time of frantic swimming, Claire finally dragged herself onto the lake shore. She looked back to see the serpent swimming away, probably to hunt down easier fish to catch. Claire's body then returned to normal once again. Then, with much exhaustion, Claire began to walk to her house, where her parents were worried sick about her for sure. All Claire thought about her adventure was that it was scary. Very, very scary. Claire walked with her parents through the theater lobby towards theater number 5. They were going to see the latest blockbuster release of the year, The Legendary Beasts. It had received critical acclaim for its superb special effects and action sequences, which were so real-looking that some have claimed that everything in the film actually was real. Claire had managed to keep her abilities in flight and breathing underwater a secret from her parents up until then, and Claire hoped to keep it a secret forever. The movie started after 20 minutes of previews, and it was just as awesome as everyone had said it was. The action sequences were explicit and top-notch, the dialogue was well written, and the story was bursting with creativity. At one point, Claire's parents left to get more snacks. After returning her gaze to the screen, Claire stared wide-eyed in horror at what she was seeing. There on the screen was her, from the night 1 year earlier. Claire watched spellbound as the events from the night played out right in front of her eyes, but from multiple angles and perspectives. As Claire watched the big screen, a figure holding a camcorder also watched. A figure who wore a dark brown burial shroud and whose face resembled that of a brown skeleton.